Tonight we are talking about commitment issues, namely within marriage, but also just in life as well. So if you have your Bibles, open up to Matthew 5, verse 31 through 37. And if you don't have a Bible, that's okay. You can pull it up on your phone or grab one on the back table over there. And we all have commitments, right? We all have things that we're supposed to do each and every day or on a regular basis. We all have commitments, and we're all sinners. So we definitely have commitment issues in some way. It is also a generational issue to have problems with commitment. Millennials, that's the generation before Gen Z, that's my generation, that's some of your guys' generation. Millennials, they kind of started being less committed to things. They were the generation before all of us in here that really just became very individualistic. Oh my goodness, individualistic, and we're like, nah, I'm gonna do my own thing, and just, I don't know, kind of shirk their responsibilities and not be very responsible. And then it bled into Gen Z and into Gen Alpha. This crowd is mixed, Gen Z and Gen Alpha, because Gen Alpha starts I think 2012. Yes, thank you. But to give you guys some statistics about commitments, marriage and divorce is something that we're going to hit heavy on tonight. So to give you guys a perspective of what our country looks like, marriage and divorce wise, some studies I looked up said that 48% of U.S. adults are married. Only, not even half adults are married. And then 39% of adults since 2010 are married to someone of a different religion. So that means about 4 out of 10 couples are married to someone with an entirely different belief system than them. But then overall, you guys know what the divorce rate in America is? It's higher than 40%. It is not 90%. That would be terrible. It's 50%. No, it is not 100%. The divorce rate is 50% in the U.S. That is crazy. That basically means that if you get married, if you were an adult today and you got married, you basically have a 50-50 chance of making it through the rest of your life, married to your partner. That is crazy. So the problem that we're addressing tonight is similar to what we haven't addressed over the past 2 weeks, and it's about the heart. But this time, it's about how your heart affects what you hold near and dear to you. And the main idea that I'm hitting on tonight in this message is that followers of Jesus should have integrity like him. Followers of Jesus should have integrity just like him. If you don't know what integrity means, integrity basically means saying what you mean and meaning what you said. If you say you're going to do something, you're going to do it. And whenever you say you're going to do something, people believe you because you have that reputation of doing what you're actually going to say. So, before we start, I also want to say, as we're talking about divorce tonight, there are probably some students in here who have experienced divorce themselves or know someone that has gone through a divorce. And I don't want to make light of that in any sort of way, because that's a painful thing. That's a terrible thing that can happen. But we're going to go over, why people divorce, what would be the biblical reasons to get a divorce, but also, even though divorce is the greatest earthly commitment that you will ever make to God, if you get married, that is, your other priorities are also important as well. So, Just wanted to make that clear. I'm not here to like shame anyone who has experienced that thing before, but it's really to give a biblical lens to look through at that experience. So I'm going to read Matthew 5, verse 31 through 37, and then we're going to go over 3 things that Jesus says about your commitment issues. It was also said, whoever divorces his wife must give her a written notice of divorce. But I tell you, everyone who divorces his wife, except in the case of sexual immorality, causes her to commit adultery, and whoever marries a divorced woman commits adultery. Again, you have heard that it was said to our ancestors, you must not break your oath, but you must keep your oaths to the Lord. But I tell you, don't take an oath at all, either by heaven, because it is God's throne, or by the earth, because it is his footstool, or by Jerusalem, because it is the city of the great king. Do not swear by your head, because you cannot make a single hair white or black. But let your yes mean yes, and your no mean no. Anything more than this is from the evil one. So we're going to hit really hard on marriage for this first point, and that is marriage will be the greatest earthly commitment that you make to God. Marriage will be the greatest earthly commitment that you make to God. The greatest commitment that you'll ever make in general in your life is to follow Jesus. But just behind that is commitment to marriage. Now, to talk about God's original design for marriage, it's supposed to be between one man, one woman, committed to each other for the rest of their lives. That is how it is. That is truth. Those are the only appropriate grounds for marriage. Marriage is a picture of God's love for humanity, which he displayed ultimately through his son Jesus on the cross and his resurrection. And marriage it's marked by sacrificial and passionate love, endless pursuit, kindness, friendship, understanding, support, family, all the things that God offers us. That's why it's a picture of God's love. God offers all those things as well. And when Jesus is saying, it was also said, whoever divorces his wife, yada, 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 he's referring to the laws that were made a couple hundred years ago, before his time, from the Old Testament. That means pre-Jesus time in the Bible, okay? And the Old Testament was never wrong about laws on marriage. Like, God gave his people pretty fair laws on it, but they took advantage of it because their hearts were invaded just by their feelings. So that was all they thought with. For example, they would say that a good reason to divorce someone would be because, oh man, we just don't love each other anymore. I think she's kind of boring, or he's kind of a jerk, and yeah, we just don't get along. Or they're just not happy, or people get into marriages that they never should have gotten into, or marriages that they were never ready for, or maybe they have money issues, they can't communicate, there's a lack of commitment on one or both sides. Like the worldly reasons for people to divorce just go on and on and on and on. But what the Bible says is that Jesus never commands divorce. He never says you should divorce, but it is an option. But he only permits it if all attempts at making things right between you and your spouse, you don't know what spouse is, that means husband or wife. If all attempts at making things right with your spouse have failed, then you are just to divorce your spouse. But what are the biblical grounds for divorce. So, really, as far as I know, and I could be, incorrect about this, but the only grounds that I could find in the Bible for divorce were sexual unfaithfulness, or which would be acting out on lust, which I'll explain more. And then also abuse. That is also another valid biblical reason to leave a marriage. And those are some really tough things to have to go through. Like having a spouse, someone who is committed to you, to love you, that you're supposed to have a family with, and then for them to betray you by giving their body away to someone else, or by harming you physically or emotionally, verbally. That's not okay. That is evil. That is sinful. And so if all attempts to reconcile the relationship have failed, you've forgiven them, but trying to make things right and trying to make the marriage work, and they won't, and they keep maybe cheating or maybe just being legitimately harmful to you, then maybe God is permitting you to leave. And leaving is hard. I do not want to downplay how hard leaving an abusive spouse or an unfaithful spouse is. Because you used to have a connection with that person. But then, as time passed, things went wrong, and you tried to make it work, but your spouse, it hurts to watch someone go through that. I mean, both of my parents watched that with their parents, and thankfully, my parents, learned the right lesson from their parents divorcing, because guys, I had 8 grandparents. Yeah, all my grandparents divorced and remarried. And so, I'm thankful that I grew up in a family where there was no divorce, there was no separation, there was no unfaithfulness or abuse. But guys, if you grew up in that environment, or if you know someone who grew up in that environment, they're not any less. God loves them just as much as he would you or anyone else. Now, for reconciliation, a couple could still technically stay together if this happens, if abuse or sexual unfaithfulness happens. But if the victim spouse, the spouse who is being wronged against, tries to reconcile with their partner to make things right, but the spouse that is wronging them refuses, then it's justifiable to divorce the partner. And also, I know our culture, different parts of our culture like to trash on men, and then other different parts of our culture like to trash on women. One side says that a man's unfaithfulness to his wife is worse than hers, or a woman's unfaithfulness to her husband is worse than his. Guys, it's all equal. Sin is sin. A man's unfaithfulness to his wife is just as sinful as a woman's unfaithfulness to her husband. Listen, Jesus never commands divorce, but only permits it if all attempts at making amends have failed. But what if, maybe you're wondering, what if the couple is just facing like typical marriage problems, right? Maybe they get in fights every now and often, they struggle to communicate, they get angry at each other every now and then, or maybe it's often that a husband and a wife will get angry at each other. And it just gets worse and worse and worse, and eventually, there's no abuse or any lustful unfaithfulness, but maybe the family is just deeply affected by the couple's conflict with each other, and they want a divorce. What then? Well, this might step on some toes, but if a couple's problems really just boil down to them not getting along, then their reasons to divorce do not justify them splitting. You see, the world says, all right, I'm going to marry this person, and I have two options about how this is going to go. It's either going to be a great marriage, or we're going to get a divorce. That's what they said. But for the church, because marriage is a picture of God's endless, relentless, loving pursuit for his bride, which is the church, unless a spouse is abusive or lustfully unfaithful, there's no just reason to leave. Because really, with the church, the two options is either good marriage or bad marriage. Now, in both the world and the church's case, I would like to have a good marriage someday. But couples who simply do not get along, if it boils down to just not getting along, they should not divorce, but should learn to get along. And also, it's not easy to get along. I mean, we get in fights with our friends all the time, right? Like, raise your hand if you got in a fight with a friend before. Yeah, almost if not all of us, hands down. Now, here's another reason why it's a picture of God's love for us. It's because we're unfaithful to God all the time. We take advantage of our relationship with God all the time, yet he never leaves us. And even when we try to leave him, he never leaves us. But when we're looking at verse 32, it says, "But I tell you, everyone who divorces his wife, except in the case of sexual immorality, causes her to commit adultery, and whoever marries a divorced woman commits adultery." Guys, this is not saying that whoever remarries is committing adultery. That's not what this is saying. If you are in a family where your parents split for biblical reasons, and one or both of your parents remarried, that doesn't automatically mean that they're committing adultery or committing sin with their new spouse. If, for example, if a wife is divorced from her husband simply because she doesn't love him anymore, and then remarries another man, then that is adultery, because that divorce wasn't cleared by biblical reasons. A reminder, adultery is when you act out the lust that is in your heart by doing sexual things with someone that is not your spouse. So if your mom or dad was divorced and remarried, and they divorced for biblical reasons, then they are not in adultery. So a simpler translation for verse 32 would be, "But I tell you, Jesus, anyone who divorces their spouse, except in the case of abuse or sexual unfaithfulness, causes them to more easily go commit adultery with someone else. And whoever marries a person who did not divorce for biblical reasons is committing adultery with them." So let's say, trying to think of some made-up names. Let's do Helga and Garfield. If Helga and Garfield, they just had typical marriage problems, and they divorced, and then Helga met Bartholomew, and they got married, that is adultery. And same thing for Garfield. If Garfield divorces his wife with typical marriage problems for unjust reasons, and goes and marries Mildred, no, that's a girl's name. then he is an adulterer too. But also, guys, if let's go back to Helga and Garfield. If Helga is cheating on Garfield, and then she divorces him, and then goes and remarries another dude, that is also adultery. But then, if it's flopped, if Garfield cheats on his wife and then remarries another woman, that is also adultery. So guys, the point I'm trying to make here with divorce is that it's what is in your heart with the commitment that you're making to your spouse? Because are you really marrying this person with the intent of loving them like Jesus? Or are you in it just to get some random benefits? Now, what about us? Because I know for all of us, marriage is in the way distant future. Hopefully, in like 20 years for all of you. I'm just kidding. I don't want you guys to wait till you're 30. That's crazy. Something I do want to speak to though is this. Listen up. If you're in a family where your parents split up, I want to tell you something. It is not your fault that your parents split up. It is not your fault. The divorce is not your fault. It is not your fault that they were fighting. It is not your fault that they maybe seemed like they hated you. And I'm sorry. I hate that you may have gone through that. It's awful. But that was their decision alone. They're your parents. And parents should take their children into consideration when deciding whether to stay or to leave their marriage. However, as the child of your parents, it is your responsibility to honor them and live like Christ, even if divorce happens. Don't hate your mom or dad. As we talked about hatred last week, holding hatred in your heart is sinful just as much as acting out on it. Marriages only work because of Jesus. He is the ultimate picture of love that we see. Now moving on to commitments that we make in life. Number 2, don't say things you don't mean. So in here it says, you must not break your oath, but you must keep your oaths to the Lord. And it also says, don't swear. Well, obviously don't swear as in saying cuss words. Please don't say that. Who just said dang it? Unbelievable. But that's not the swearing that this passage is talking about. Listen up. That's not what this passage is talking about. To swear means to affirm how true a statement is by calling on God to judge you if it is in fact untrue. So to give an example, let's say someone says, "Oh, I swear on my parents' grave, I will have revenge on the people who killed them." That's very movie-esque, right? Isn't it? Or also if someone says, and I'm saying these like in quotes, I'm not saying them like for real. If you say like, "I swear to God," then that is not okay. That is sinful. Or you can also not say, "As surely as the Lord lives, I will do this." Swearing by things means swearing by something that belongs to God. And which implicitly swears by his name, which is holy, by the way. Something about God's name in the Old Testament times is that Israelites became so afraid of even saying God's name, which is Yahweh. They revered his name so very much that they didn't even call him Yahweh. In fact, they didn't even write the whole thing out. Rather than writing YAHWEH, in their language, they took out the vowels, so it was YHWH. That's how they wrote it, because they respected and feared God's name so much. So don't swear by God, don't swear on your life or someone's grave or any of that, because if you swear on any of those things, you are swearing upon God's holy name and calling judgment upon yourself if you are wrong. And marriage, like I said earlier, it's the greatest earthly commitment, but your other commitments are important too. So if you say, oh man, yeah, I swear I'm going to do this. I swear by the hairs on my head that I'm going to do this for you. That's not the way to live. You can't just live in a cycle of reaction. You can't just live in a cycle of not keeping your commitments either. Like, with this cycle, man, I was like internally puking as I was writing this. Because this cycle that I'm about to read to you guys is just awful. Let's say you're really bad at keeping commitments. So you wake up in the morning way later than you're supposed to. You rush out the door. You barely get to school on time and barely start or if you're homeschooled, barely get your schoolwork done on time. You eat a horrible breakfast. Rather than eating something healthy like eggs or fruit, you eat a Pop-Tart or a Cliff Bar. I definitely didn't eat a Cliff Bar this morning, actually. You also, you don't, and because you're tired and because you had a horrible breakfast, or maybe not even eat breakfast at all, you didn't pay attention during lessons, you forgot your lunch at home, or you forgot to even make it while you're at school, and then you get home or you get done with school and you eat a bunch of junk food because you were hungry from not even eating lunch or not even eating breakfast, so you just want to stuff your face with whatever's available. Then you crash in bed or play video games or scroll on your phone to numb the pain that you're basically causing for yourself each and every single day of your life. And then you have to skip sports practice because you have late homework to catch up on because you didn't do it the night before, you procrastinated, and you also slept at a time that you really weren't supposed to, or you're playing video games or scrolling on your phone like a zombie. And then you barely get any homework done because you procrastinate on doing it over and over and over again. And then all the while, you haven't even read your Bible or prayed that day. And then you stay up way too late to do your homework. You stay up way too late to do anything productive. And then overall, you just feel behind in life. And then the cycle repeats over and over and over and over again. What kind of life is that? It's terrible. That's why I was internally puking when I was writing that, because I'm just like, man, what does the life of an uncommitted person look like? That's the picture of what it is. And I'll be honest, that I'm guilty of some of these poor habits on some days of the week. But also, that just because I might struggle with that, or maybe you struggle with that doesn't mean we have to stay in that struggle. So what do we need to do? We need to be proactive and put the first things first. Guys, your phones and your games can wait. If you don't control yourself and prioritize your other commitments the way Jesus would, then you're going to stay stuck in your cycle. Legitimately. That is how your life is going to be unless you change. You guys know what the definition of insanity is? It's doing the same thing over and over again, but expecting a different result each and every time. That is a miserable way to live. Now, obviously, being overcommitted, that is not okay, but I think with our generation, we have a problem of being wishy-washy with our commitments. Where it's like, maybe your friends ask if you want to hang out, and you're just like, I don't know, maybe. Or your teacher's like, hey, are you almost done with that paper? And you're like, I'll let you know later. Or if you have to say those things, if you legitimately mean that you don't know something, or you'll let someone know later, then follow up. And also, Some of you guys are really bad at texting. Seriously, I text you guys and I hope and pray for a response within 24 hours, but then I get left on red for some reason. Yeah, it is you, Liam. And so, guys, what we need to do is commit only to commitments that you can keep. Why are we making promises that we can't keep? I know that previous generations, they're pretty hardworking. They're very committed. I would say that they're on the side of the spectrum where they overcommit. But as generations have passed on, we are very undercommitted. And sadly, oftentimes that bleeds into our relationship with Christ. So, what are we going to do? Well, this leads to this last verse of this passage and my last point, which is integrity is proven by godly patterns. But let your yes mean yes. I almost said, let your yes mean no. Let your yes mean yes, and your no mean no. Anything more than this is from the evil one. Jesus' followers should be people whose words are so characterized, so full of integrity, that people don't need any extra assurance that the Christian is going to follow through with what they say they're going to do. To put it simply, as a Christian, people should know you by how well you keep your commitments. So a big reflection question that I want to ask you guys is, are you reliable? If someone asks you to do something, whether it's little thing or something big, can they rely on you? Would it have been appropriate for them to ask you to help them with something? Are you able to be leaned upon by others so that you can help them? Like, I hear guys say all the time, like, oh yeah, trust me, bro. Trust. This is gonna work. And then whatever they do doesn't work. It's like fake news or something. But also, I'm also reminded by the boy who cried wolf. I don't know if I remember the story correctly, but if you guys need a refresher, here it is. There was a shepherd boy who was keeping track of sheep. And then he thought it would be really funny to cry wolf. And he would, you would actually cry wolf because a wolf came into the flock to kill your sheep. So he was like, I'm going to cry wolf and make everyone freak out. So he did that once. And they got really mad at him. He did it twice. They got even more mad at him. He did it a third time. Nobody believed him. Because this kid is a liar. This kid is not reliable. Whatever he says that comes out of his mouth, it's not true. But when he cried that third time, guess what? There was actually a wolf. And he got eaten up by a wolf. Why'd you say yes to that? That's awful. Yeah, that is awful. You guys are violent. But, guys, to boil it all down, listen up, to boil it all down, your example of following Jesus should be believable. And I know you're young. I know that you have less responsibilities than adults do, very likely. But with the commitments that you have, are you stewarding them well? What are you doing with your commitments? And these commitments that you have now, they're training you for greater commitments in life. Like marriage, that's why I joined these two passages together about divorce and telling the truth, and letting your yes mean yes and your no mean no. Is because they're linked together. So what is your heart doing with your commitments? Is your heart truly in it? So